Anna, do you got a pot of pure butter ghee in front of you? Why?
We are doing some, I guess, arts and crafts today on Crowd Science.
Fun.
We are going to use this to make a candle. So let's just open this up. You can see that lovely golden stuff in there. So ghee is pure fat and it comes from butter. You make it by warming up butter until it melts, and then you skim off all of the milk solids and the water evaporates, and what you're left with is this stuff. So, got a bit of cotton wool here. We're going to sort of make a wick out of it. So squash the end down. Okay. We've heated up the ghee so it's liquid. And I'm just going to put it in there. Hey! Told you it would work.
Yeah.
Let there be light. I'm Anand Jagatia.
And I'm producer Marika Peters.
And the reason why we've done this is because actually this week's question is all about the process that's going on in this candle, which is burning fat.
Okay, cool. Let's go to the listener who sent it to us.
Hello, Crowd Science. I'm Lily Clever from San Luis Obispo, California, and I'd like to know what happens to fat when we exercise. I was just in the cardio room one day watching all these people working so hard to, what I'm assuming is to burn fat, and I just wondered, are we inhaling each other's fat? Like, where does it go? What happens to the fat that's within those cells as we, and I'm air quoting here, burn it off? There's a metabolic process by which it leaves our body. That's what I'm really curious about.
It's a great question, Lily. Why have you been thinking about this? Are you someone that does a lot of exercise?
Yeah, I've been exercising pretty much 5 hours a day since I was 30, and I just love it. I love the process of it, and I just find the more energy that's expended, the more energy I have.
So Lily's wondering about burning fat, which is a phrase that a lot of us use all the time. But even for those of us who do a lot less exercise than that, all of us have fat inside our bodies. All of us use it for energy. What Lily wants to know is what actually happens in that process. Where does the fat go? Where does it end up? It is really interesting. I'm pretty intrigued too. But it's not just an armchair discussion, because according to the World Health Organization, deaths that are linked to obesity and to being overweight now outnumber globally deaths from undereating and not getting enough food from undernutrition. So the science of how we use fat, how we store it, and how we burn it and lose weight is really important for global public health. But before we get to all of that stuff, I think we need to go back to basics and ask what actually is fat.
The technical term is adipose tissue, and actually it's an active organ and it's essential for health.
That's Ursula White from the Pennington Biomedical Research Center in the US, where she studies human adipose tissue, which is body fat to you and me.
We have different types of fat in the body, and we know that fat tissue is located in different areas of the body. The characteristic for which it's most known is being an energy storage depot. But in addition, it's secreting different factors, different amounts of these factors. There are actually some molecules or hormones that are released from fat tissue that are not released from anywhere else in the body. This is something that many people don't know, the fact that something that's secreted from the fat tissue can talk to the brain, can talk to the heart, can talk to the skeletal muscle, and be very influential in regulating the body.
So if, like me, you thought of fat a bit like oil or lard sitting underneath your skin or running through your veins, then you might not have been giving fat the credit it's due. Fat stores energy, but it also does much, much more. Depending on where fat is in your body, it can also have some pretty important health benefits.
When the adipose or fat tissue is situated in the abdominal region, these individuals were more at risk for cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, etc. The adipose tissue situated in the lower body, and when I say lower body, I'm speaking of the thigh region, in the gluteal region or the buttocks, it can in fact be protective from some of these diseases.
So, quick recap. We've got fat, as in the molecules, stored in fat cells, adipocytes, and these make up fat tissue, which is the soft, spongy layer we would recognise as body fat. When we put on weight, or lose it, it's this organ that's getting bigger or smaller, because the fat cells are changing in two distinct ways.
There was a study that was completed a few years ago, specifically looking at how the fat tissue expands during time of weight gain. And what this study showed was that in men, the primary mechanism of expansion was an increase in fat cell size, whereas in women, it was the opposite. The primary mechanism of expansion was an increase in fat cell number.
But when people lose weight, if they end up burning more calories than they're taking in for a long period of time and they become smaller, either you might be losing fat cells or they might be getting smaller because they've got less fat in them.
Absolutely. And that's a source of a lot of studies right now. We know there's a decrease in the size of the fat cell because we know that the fat or lipid inside the fat cell is decreasing, but it remains to be seen whether the whole fat cell is actually removed.
It's not yet clear whether you can completely get rid of fat cells, which are the containers for fat, although we do know that the fat within them can disappear. But how? Where does it go when we burn it off? Well, it all comes down to our metabolism.
Metabolism is all about how much energy you need to generate to function, and it depends on what type of function you want to do.
Dr. Laura Watson studies metabolism.
Hi, I'm Laura.
The grand total of all the vital, life-sustaining chemical reactions in the body that underpins everything we do. From walking and talking to just lounging around.
Let's have a little lie down.
Doing any of this stuff, even apparently doing nothing at all, requires energy because our cells need a constant supply just to stay alive. And at the NIHR Cambridge Clinical Research Facility, Laura studies how much energy people use and the way that they use it, which is known as energy expenditure.
Age, gender, fat mass, muscle mass, organ mass, what you ate the night before, all of that influences what your energy expenditure does. And activity, obviously, is a big one.
Can Laura help us get an answer to Lily's question about where fat goes when we exercise? Well, it turns out that depending on how intensely you're working out or how long you've been going for, your body might not be using much fat at all, so it isn't going anywhere. Instead, you may be relying on your other big store of energy, carbohydrates.
Even from lying down to then sitting up, that instant energy, you're going to use carbohydrate because it's a very quick, readily available fuel.
We use carbohydrate, which our cells store in a form called glycogen, when we need energy quickly. Think of it like setting fire to some newspaper. It lights immediately, but it doesn't last very long. Fat, on the other hand, is a bit more like coal. It takes longer to catch, but it's more energy dense, so you get more out of it.
If you were running a marathon, for example, where you've very much used up your glycogen stores, you've hit the wall, you're going to be using your fat stores because that's what's left or that's what's available.
During moderate intensity exercise, something like jogging, your body initially relies on its carbohydrate stores. And as these slowly run out, it turns to using fats. Hitting the wall is what happens when your glycogen reserves are completely depleted, and as any long-distance runner will tell you, it ain't pleasant. During really high-intensity exercise, like sprinting, there just isn't time for your body to burn fat to get energy, so it resorts to using carbs almost exclusively. However, you can't keep this up forever, which is why we very quickly get tired out. In Laura's lab, she's got kit that can measure how much of each fuel I'm using, and for that, I need to get on my bike.
For, let's say, 20 minutes at a wattage that will get you roughly to 50% of your age max heart rate.
Laura straps a mask to my face.
Let me put this on you. Does that feel snug?
And I sit on the exercise bike to pedal for the next 20 minutes.
So keep the RPM above for 35, 41, 46. Oh, you're making it harder.
Yeah.
I can see it going up.
So it popped up to 75 watts.
So you're trying to get my heart rate
Trying
up.
to get your heart rate up, yeah.
Let me explain how this experiment is going to work. As you can hear, I'm breathing in and out a bit like Darth Vader because of the mask, and that is because most of the time, apart from during very intense exercise, we need oxygen to unlock the energy in fats or carbs. The fuel molecule, whichever one it is broken down, and this produces carbon dioxide and water as waste products. Now, here's the clever bit. The ratio of oxygen in to CO2 out is different for fats versus carbs. And that's because each one contains different numbers of carbon atoms, and these react with oxygen in different proportions. The upshot is basically that by measuring the amount of CO2 in my breath, Laura can get an estimate of which fuel my body is relying on.
So you've got oxygen is in red on this graph and carbon dioxide is in blue, and you've got that nice gap between the two at the minute. When these two cross over is when you've reached a ratio of 1,
Right.
and then you are producing more carbon dioxide than you are consuming oxygen.
So after the 20 minutes, will you be able to get a rough number of like how many kilojoules I've used?
So it will be in watts.
Is that like a Mars bar? Is it like...
Well, I can convert that into calories,
Yeah,
which
cool.
might be easier. It definitely won't be a Mars bar.
Laura goes away and does some quick calculations.
Your resting energy expenditure is about 1,500 calories a day. So that's what you need just to be awake.
Then she works out how much I spent during my time on the bike.
You have expended 16 calories of fat.
After 20 minutes of hard graft, I have to say I am a bit disappointed with the results.
Wow.
But actually 98.5 calories in carbohydrate.
Was that what you were expecting?
We wanted you to be in that kind of aerobic fat threshold. But what this shows is that you're using a combination of both. And actually, you're using more of your glycogen stores because they're already available. You've had breakfast. So that's what your body has decided to use in that 15 minutes of cycling at about 60% of your max heart rate.
How many biscuits is that?
I'd say 100 calories could be a banana. So
Okay.
your carbohydrate, you've maybe oxidized a banana if you're going to put it in that terms.
Yeah.
And 16 calories of fat, a bite of a biscuit, if you're
Okay.
lucky. I
Right,
don't know.
okay.
Sorry.
So even though I burned a pretty tiny amount of fat, it's actually proof that I was cycling pretty hard. Because at rest, we get about 40% of our energy from carbs, and the other 60% comes from fat. As we work harder and harder and we need more and more energy, we start to get more and more of it from carbs. But Lily wanted to know what actually happens to our fat during exercise. Where does it go? And are we really burning it like the ghee in the candle from earlier?
You're moving energy from your fat cells, your adipose tissue, say into your muscle, that's where you're needing it. So I think of it as more as breaking these molecules down rather than burning them. So when we're talking about exercising, we're talking about breaking down that energy into something that we can use. And at the very end point, you then breathe out excess carbon dioxide. That's how you kind of get rid of it. You do expire more carbon dioxide when you exercise and when you oxidize fuels. But I wouldn't say that that's how you get rid of fat from your body, is by expiring CO2. It's very much broken down and it's utilized.
You're listening to Crowd Science from the BBC World Service, and it looks like we're getting an answer to Lily's question about where our fat goes when we exercise. We've just heard that we're actually using up fat all the time, not just when we exert ourselves, and in fact some kinds of exercise hardly rely on fat at all. And as Laura says, we're not burning this fat like in a candle. Instead, we break down the fat molecules inside our cells into smaller molecules, and this releases energy, but not in the form of heat. Rather, our cells harness it to drive various metabolic processes, like muscle contraction, for example. Once we've squeezed all the energy that we can out of a fat molecule, you're left with CO2 and water, and some of that is exhaled. Which means that, Lily, while you're not breathing in other people's fat in the gym, yes, you are breathing in other people's atoms. And in fact, at least some of my atoms were once in you, and vice versa, which is pretty mind-blowing. We've actually made a crowd science all about it called Were My Atoms Once Your Atoms? And you can find that in BBC Sounds in our archive. So that's the life cycle of fat. But Lily is also interested in how this sequence of storing and burning fat changes over the life cycle of a human being, and how she can stay in shape well into old age.
My experience as well as my observation is as people get older, and let's focus in on postmenopausal women, I noticed a huge body shift, a thickening of the mid-center, and just this general slowing down. And so I don't want to have that happen to me. So I work very diligently, very hard at keeping a really low BMI and keeping my energy up.
Lily is right. People do often seem to get larger as they get older. But why? The usual answer is, well, my metabolism is slowing down. But is that true? Luckily for us, someone's done the research and discovered an answer you might find surprising.
Kids burn a lot more calories than we'd expect for their body size alone. And we think that's because of all the work that their body's doing to develop, their organs and their immune system and all this other developmental work they have to do. And then, of course, in older age, as we get past 60, our metabolism starts to slow down.
This is Herman Pontzer.
I'm a professor of evolutionary anthropology and global health at Duke University.
And Herman's found that apart from these big changes he's just described, actually for most of our adult lives, our metabolism stays pretty stable.
The stresses that sort of build as we get older, you get a job and you've got kids and you've got all these things on your plate, that can make you feel different as well. I think we tend to blame all those changes. We call it metabolism. When we look at actual measurements of calories burned per day, it isn't really metabolism, it's all these other things. And so it's most likely those other changes that are pushing us to eat a bit more, for example, put on weight, or otherwise feel differently than we did when we were younger.
So what can people do to battle the bulge? Lily spends hours at the gym. That must be helping, right? Well, Herman has looked into this question too. And again, the results were totally unexpected.
I had a chance to work with a community called the Hadza. And they live in northern Tanzania, and they have a very physically active hunter-gatherer lifestyle. They walk kilometers and kilometers every day to get wild game or plant foods from their landscape. And so that was a good opportunity for us to ask, how many calories does your body need to burn every day to support that lifestyle? And we expected it would be a lot, right? Because, again, they're so physically active, and we're generally told that the more active you are, the more calories you burn every day. But instead, to our surprise, what we found was they burn the same number of calories every day as men and women in the US, in Europe, and other industrialized countries. In other words, even though they get more physical activity in a day than most Americans get in a week, there was no difference in how their bodies were burning calories. So we know that they walk a lot, so they must be burning a lot of energy on walking. They're not more efficient as walking or something like that. Instead, their bodies are adjusting elsewhere during the course of the day. So they're saving energy in other non-activity tasks that allows them to keep their total calories burned the same as you and me, even though they're much more physically active.
These findings are just so counterintuitive. How can somebody who runs 4 times a week burn the same number of calories overall as someone who has a more leisurely lifestyle? I think it's fair to say that researchers in this field don't yet have a full explanation for what's going on here. But Herman thinks that there are some clues, and they're to do with how the body adjusts the energy that it spends on other processes.
We have some evidence that it's saving energy on things like immune function. So, for example, if you are really physically active, if you exercise regularly, you will have lower levels of inflammation, right? Inflammation is just your immune system kind of working overtime more than it needs to. And inflammation is also bad for you. So when you exercise, your body reduces the amount of inflammation it produces. People who exercise also have a smaller response to stress. They produce less adrenaline and cortisol over the course of a day than people who aren't exercising.
Studies in this area are ongoing, but so far no one has come up with any conclusive answers. Still, even though it is the opposite of what we might have expected, think about it another way and it does make sense. So many things about the human body are about maintaining a balance, from body temperature to hormone levels. So why wouldn't it also find a way to compensate and keep our metabolism constant over time? Herman's studies look at data across populations, and it seems like when you take body weight into account, people's metabolisms are pretty similar. Even so, there is some variation, and we all know those lucky people who seem to eat whatever they want and stay slim, people who just say they have a really high metabolism. I asked Herman what his data says about this.
As far as we can tell, that feeling of whether or not your metabolism is fast or slow is more about your relationship with food and how food makes your brain reward system light up and how it makes you feel, and whether or not you find it difficult to eat the right amount or perhaps you find it easier to overeat. That seems to be what people are really referring to when they talk about their metabolism and how fast or slow it is. Because unless you've had it measured, you don't really know if you have a fast or slow metabolism.
So, according to Herman, people who do naturally burn more energy aren't more or less likely to gain weight than the rest of us. And all of this has big consequences for how we think about exercise, diet, and weight loss.
If you want to get a handle on obesity, you need to focus on diet. The foods we eat are the biggest lever we have to try to change and regulate our weight. Obesity is mostly a diet problem, not so much an exercise problem. Now, the other thing that we can say is exercise is really good for us. It's not a great way to lose weight, but it's important for other aspects of your health.
If exercise doesn't change your metabolism and you don't really fancy going on a diet, you might be wondering what else you can do to keep your fat stores at a healthy level. Well, believe it or not, the answer may lie in having more fat. But it's a different kind of fat to the type that we've looked at so far. And it's pretty special.
We have white fat, which most people think of when they think of fat, and we've developed or evolved this tissue as a way to store excess calories. In addition to white fat, which stores energy, mammals also have another kind of fat called brown fat. And interestingly, rather than storing energy, this kind of fat can dissipate energy or convert energy into heat. And we now know that brown fat not only generates heat, but it also can help protect against weight gain and many of the complications associated with obesity.
This is Paul Cohen.
I'm an associate professor at the Rockefeller University in New York City.
He studies the other kind of fat, brown fat. Now, these cells work in a totally different way to white adipocytes. They do produce heat. So in a way, they're a bit more like the candle of ghee we burned at the start of the show. When we're born, we have a lot of brown fat. Those cuddly rolls on the back and the neck of babies, which makes them so cute. It helps to keep them warm when they're tiny and hairless. But until recently, scientists thought that adults had hardly any brown fat at all. It turns out that actually we do, although only in very tiny amounts.
The exact amount of brown fat that humans have is not actually known, but it can be measured in gram quantities, whereas white fat can make up easily more than a third or greater of a person's total body weight. My group looked at a cohort of over 50,000 individuals who had had the kind of scan that can detect brown fat in humans, and by looking at a patient's brown fat status and then linking that to all of the information in their electronic health records, we were able to determine that brown fat is associated with reduced likelihood of a whole variety of chronic diseases, including type 2 diabetes, hypertension, lipid disorders, and coronary artery disease.
So somewhat ironically, having more brown fat could also be protective against obesity. Paul says that we don't really understand how brown fat actually has these effects, but there is some evidence that increasing the amount of brown fat that we have as adults, or increasing its activity, could influence our metabolism. So how could we do this?
One way of making more brown fat would be to identify and study the precursor cells that give rise to brown fat cells and see if we can either increase the number of these precursor cells or do something to make more of these precursor cells become brown fat cells. Another possibility, though, would be to work with the existing brown fat we have and try to develop interventions or pharmacologic approaches that increase the activity of brown fat. We already know that one very effective way of increasing the activity of brown fat is cold exposure. However, most people, of course, don't really like being cold, so I don't know if that's going to be a durable solution. But if we understand more about the biology, then there's the potential that we could recapitulate some of the same effects of cold exposure with drugs or other interventions without actually making people expose themselves to the cold. I'm obviously biased, but I think there's an enormous amount to be learned by studying how fat works, both white and brown fat. And I think at the end, it's really a window into human metabolism with really strong and evident links to a whole variety of serious diseases.
For something that gets such a bad rap when we normally talk about it, fat actually does a lot more than most of us ever realised. It protects us from disease, tells our brains when we're hungry, generates heat, and of course stores energy. And yet in lots of ways fat is still mysterious, and researchers are still figuring out how it does all the things it does. While we know that carrying too much fat is bad for our health, it also looks like our ideas about how to lose weight have been totally misplaced for decades. Who could have thought that something as seemingly mundane as fat could be so full of surprises?
We've reached the end of this edition of Crowd Science from the BBC World Service. Today's question came from me, Lulu Clever, in California. The show is presented by Anand Jagatia and produced by Marika Peters. If you'd like the team to investigate an idea, you can email them at crowdscience@bbc.co.uk. Thank you for listening.